Then Solomon said, "The Lord promised that he would dwell in darkness, and I have built an house to his name, that he should dwell therein without end." And Solomon turned his face, and blessed all the multitude of Israel, for all the company stood attentive. And he said, "Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he hath fulfilled in work that thing that he spake to David my father, and said, From the day in which I led my people out of the land of Egypt, I chose not a city of all the lineages of Israel, that an house should be builded therein to my name. Neither I chose any man, that he should be duke upon my people Israel. But I chose Jerusalem, that my name be therein, and I chose David, to ordain him upon my people Israel. And when it was of the will of David my father, to build an house to the name of the Lord God of Israel, the Lord said to him, For this was thy will, to build an house to my name. Sithly, thou didst well, having such a will. But yet thou shalt not build an house to me. Nevertheless, the son that shall go out of thy loins, he shall build an house to my name. Therefore the Lord hath fulfilled his word that he spake. And I rose up for David my father, that I sat on the throne of Israel, as the Lord spake. And I have builded an house to the name of the Lord God of Israel. And I have put therein the ark, in which is the covenant of the Lord, which he covenanted with the sons of Israel. Therefore Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord, even against all the multitude of Israel, and stretched forth his hands. For Solomon had made a brazen fundament, and had set it in the midst of the great house. And it had 5 cubits of length, and 5 cubits of breadth, and 3 cubits of height. And he stood there upon it. And from that time he kneeled against all the multitude of Israel, and raised up his hands into heaven, and said, Lord God of Israel, none is like thee. Thou art God in heaven and in earth, which keepest covenant and mercy with thy servants, that go before thee in all their heart. Thou hast given to David thy servant my father, whatever thing thou hast spoken or promised to him. And thou hast fulfilled and worked those things which thou promisest by mouth, as also this present time proveth. Now therefore, Lord God of Israel, fulfill thou to thy servant, my father David, whatever things thou hast spoken, saying, A man of thee shall not fail before me, that shall sit upon the throne of Israel. So nevertheless, if thy sons keep my ways, and go in my law, as and thou hast gone before me. And now, Lord God of Israel, thy word be made steadfast, which thou spakest to thy servant David. Therefore, whether it is believable that the Lord dwell with men on earth, if heaven and the heavens of heavens may not take, either may not hold thee, Lord, how much more this house which I have builded? But hereto only is it made, that thou, my Lord God, behold there the prayer of thy servant, and the beseeching of him, and that thou hear the prayers which thy servant poureth before thee, that thou open thine eyes upon this house by days and nights, upon the place in which thou promisest, that thy name should be called, and that thou wouldest hear the prayer which thy servant prayeth therein. Hear thou the prayers of thy servants, and of thy people Israel, whoever prayeth in this place. Hear thou from thy dwelling place, that is, from heaven, and do thou mercy to him. If any man sinneth against his neighbor, and cometh ready to swear against him, and bindeth himself with cursing before the altar in this house, thou shalt hear from heaven, and shalt do the doom of thy servants, so that thou yield to the wicked man his way into his own head, and that thou avenge the just man, and yield to him after the righteousness. If thy people Israel is overcome of enemies, for they shall do sin against thee, and if they converted, do penance and beseech thy name, and pray in this place, thou shalt hear from heaven, and do thou mercy to the sin of thy people Israel, and bring them again into the land which thou hast given to them and to their fathers. If when heaven is closed, rain came not down for the sin of thy people, and they beseech thee in this place, and acknowledge to thy name, and be turned from their sins, when thou hast tormented them, hear thou, Lord, from heaven, and forgive thou the sins of thy servants, and to thy people Israel, and teach thou them a good way, by which they shall enter, Give thou rain to the land, which thou hast given to thy people to have in possession. If that hunger riseth in the land, and pestilence and rust, and wind destroying corns or crops, and if that a locust and a bruckus cometh, and if enemies besiege the gates of the city, after that the countries be destroyed, and if in any manner vengeance and sickness oppresseth thy people, if any of thy people Israel beseecheth, and knoweth his vengeance, that is his sin, wherefore he hath deserved vengeance and sickness, and if he spreadeth abroad his hands in this house, thou shalt hear from heaven, that is, from thine high dwelling place, and do thou mercy, and yield thou to each man after his ways, which thou knowest that he hath in his heart. For thou alone knowest the hearts of the sons of men, that they dread thee, and go in thy ways in all days, in which they live on the face of the earth, which thou hast given to our fathers. Also, thou shalt hear from heaven, thy most steadfast dwelling place, a stranger, which is not of thy people Israel, if he cometh from a far land, for thy great name, and for thy strong hand, and thine arm stretched forth, and prayeth in this place, and thou shalt do all things for which that pilgrim inwardly calleth thee, that all the people of earth know thy name, and dread thee, as thy people Israel doeth, and that they know that thy name is called on this house, which I have builded to thy name. If thy people goeth out to battle against his adversaries, by the way in which thou sendest them, they shall worship thee against the way in which the city is set, which thou hast chosen, and the house which I builded to thy name, that thou hear from heaven their prayers and their beseeching, and do thou vengeance to their adversaries. And if they sin against thee, for no man is alive that sinneth not, and if thou art wroth with them, and betakest them to their enemies, and enemies lead them prisoners into a far land, either certainly which land is nigh, and if they be converted in their heart in the land to which they be led prisoners, and they do penance, and beseech thee in the land of their captivity, and say, we have sinned, we have done wickedly, we did unjustly, and if they turn again to thee in all their heart, and in all their soul, in the land of their captivity to which they be led, and if they shall worship thee against the way of their land, which thou hast given to the fathers of them, and against the way of the city which thou hast chosen, and of the house which I builded to thy name, that thou hear from heaven, that is, from thy steadfast dwelling place, the prayers of them, and that thou make doom, and forgive to thy people, though they be sinful. For thou art my God, I beseech thee, be thine eyes opened, and thine ears be attentive to the prayer that is made in this place. Now therefore, Lord God, rise up into thy rest, thou and the ark of thy strength, Lord God. Thy priests be clothed with health, and thy holy men be glad in good things. Lord God, turn not thou away from the face of thy Christ, of thine anointed. Have thou mind on the mercies of David thy servant,